Part of 10, Chapter 5. After our council, things were much clearer. Dorothy, always generous, told us that she would allow the traitor Ozma to stay in the palace, but it was clear her betrayal meant she was no longer fit to rule Oz. The five of us agreed that the best solution would be for Dorothy to rule in Ozma's stead, until she figured out a way to undo Ozma's damage. Glinda pointed out that as Dorothy's closest confidants in Oz, closer than Glinda herself, she added modestly, the Lion, the Scarecrow, and I were to be entrusted with a new level of responsibility. It was possible Dorothy had even more enemies within the palace, and it was our job to protect her. I knew what Glinda was really saying. I was Dorothy's protector. I had been given this task, and I knew I would never fail. As we talked, the lion's stomach rumbled audibly, and Dorothy clapped her hands and laughed. "Silly old lion," she said. "You never change. Go get something to eat. Scare? Tin? Why don't you go with him for now? Glinda and I have much to discuss. And Tin," I turned to her eagerly, "why don't you come back and see me after supper? Alone, I mean." I was so flustered I could only mumble an assent, and I cursed myself as I followed the Scarecrow out the door. If I kept making a fool of myself in front of Dorothy, she was hardly going to see me as a suitor. The lion bounded away from us, eager to get to his next meal. But as soon as the door to the council chamber swung shut on Dorothy and Glinda, the Scarecrow grabbed my arm. "What on earth do you really think is going on?" he muttered. "This stuff about Ozma, and Glinda coming back, and Dorothy being put in charge. None of the story makes sense." I was silent for a moment as we walked toward the banquet hall. I wanted to disagree with him, to shout him down, but he was only echoing what I've thought just a few moments ago. "I'm sure Dorothy would never do anything to hurt anyone," I said finally. That much I know for certain was true. "Glinda coming back is certainly convenient," he mused. "Her timing is a little too perfect, don't you think?" "What do you mean?" I asked, though the same thing had occurred to me. "I suppose it doesn't matter. What does matter is that Dorothy's in charge, at least for now, and that means quite a bit of opportunity for us. The lion's a silly old thing, always has been. But you and me?" He paused significantly. "No more corn cobs and Winkies, I can tell you that much," he said when I didn't respond. "I'm not interested in power," I said truthfully. "I don't mind being king of the Winkies, but I'm not ambitious." "Not in that way you aren't," he said with a smile. "But I think you've got other aspirations on your mind, don't you?" "I don't know what you mean," I said with dignity, and he laughed. "It doesn't matter," he said. "We're both a lot closer than we were yesterday to getting what we want. Let's just put it in that way. You chased after Dorothy, old friend. She couldn't do better. But me, I've got another sun fruit to light. I'm not going to ask too many questions about what Glinda's up to, and I don't think you should either." "I would never doubt Dorothy," I said, ignoring his real meaning. "No, you wouldn't," he said. "I think that's becoming quite clear to everyone." Dorothy wasn't at dinner. I tried to hide my disappointment as the Scarecrow and I sat with the lion while he merrily gulped down a pile of drumsticks. The mood in the banquet hall was subdued. In Ozma's chair, a big green throne-like thing carved with scenes from various places in Oz that shifted when you looked at them, was conspicuously empty. The lion and the Scarecrow chatted it away, and I was too distracted to join in. My conversation with the Scarecrow that afternoon had upset me. On the surface, he was still his usual joyful self, but there was a strange new glitter in his black button eyes that made me uncomfortable. Was he hiding something? Was this going to be the future of Oz? All of us suspicious of each other? I thought with longing of the old happy days, all of us innocent and merry, enjoying our quest. I missed that time so much that for a moment I would have traded a future with Dorothy to have it back. Just the four of us, wandering together through Oz. I stared at my plate, torn between excitement and despair. I was finally going to be alone with Dorothy, to find out why she wanted to see me. Could she possibly be ready to confess her feelings for me? I told myself not to get my hopes up, but there was no mistaking the signal she'd been sending me since the banquet. What other reason could she possibly have? But what on earth was going on with my oldest, dearest friends? What intrigues were shimmering beneath the surface? What kind of wickedness was lurking in the heart of Oz? I left the banquet hall as soon as I was able to graciously excuse myself. The Scarecrow, watching me fumble in my excitement as I pushed my chair away from the table, muttered something to the Lion under his breath, and they both laughed. But I didn't care. The moment of truth was upon me. Whatever happened, I was going to tell Dorothy how I felt, and find out if my love was returned. It had to be, I told myself, my heart pounding as I approached Dorothy's quarters. It simply has to be. Dorothy had already moved into Ozma's former bedroom. She hadn't had much time to change the decor to suit her. There were still lots of green veils, vines twisting from the corners of the room, dotted with sweet-smelling blossoms that released occasional flurries of perfumed butterflies, and the burbling sound of a merry forest stream emanating from what looked suspiciously like a closet. Still, she dug up an enormous vanity somewhere, and it was already covered with pots and creams and powders and brushes, vials of perfume, and huge bouquets of flowers nearly bursting from their vases. A hot flood of jealousy surged through me. What admirers had sent her flowers? Why hadn't I thought of that? And then Dorothy turned to face me, and all other thoughts fled my mind. She was seated before her vanity, in a soft silken dressing gown that flowed from her shoulders and pooled in a shimmering pile of fabric at her feet. Her long hair was down, brushed into a shining cape that spilled over her shoulders, and her blue eyes were wide and guileless as she looked at me. Without thinking, I crossed the room and knelt before her on one knee, lowering my head. "Dorothy," I said, and stopped, overcome with an emotion. Now that I was really, truly here, it seemed there was nothing I could possibly say that would express the real depths of my feelings. "Oh, Tin," she said gently, "don't bow before me, my dear friend. It makes me feel like everything's changed." She put one slim hand below my chin and tilted my face up so that I was looking directly at her. I struggled to keep my eyes away from the deep, tantalizing V of her dressing gown, focusing instead on her ruby-red mouth, which was no less distracting. "But everything has changed, Your Majesty," I said. "The Scarecrow and the Lion were practically strangers. You have all this magic now, and you're ruling the kingdom, and the witch—" "I trust Glinda," Dorothy said firmly, "and so must you." I seized both her hands in mine. "Dorothy," I said breathlessly, "run away with me. Away from whatever's happening here. Oz will sort itself out. I'll keep you safe, I swear it." She smiled sadly, and to my horror I saw that her blue eyes were filling with tears. "Darling Tin," she said softly, a single tear splashing across the silk of her robe. "You know I can't do that. Oz needs me. Why else would I have been called here? It's my duty. I've already lost so much. What does it mean anymore to lose my freedom? My safety?" She sighed, looking away from me. But she didn't let go of my hands. My heart nearly tore itself in two as I looked at her. She was so beautiful, so noble. "Dorothy," I said, summoning all my courage, You know there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. I would keep you safe, I swear it. I'll protect you." She smiled at me. "I would never ask that of you, dear Tin. No, go back to your kingdom, to the life you had before. I returned and everything got turned upside down. At least one of us should have a chance at happiness." I leapt to my feet and drew her to me. "Dorothy, never. I'll never leave your side. Just let me stay by you. Let me be your protector. Please, Dorothy, that's all I want." I took a deep breath, crushing her to my chest as she looked up at me breathlessly. "Dorothy, I love—" At that moment, the door to Dorothy's chambers flew open, and Glinda swooped in, followed closely by the Scarecrow. "Oh!" Dorothy gasped, startled, and let me go. Dorothy's mouth twitched at what looked like almost a smirk. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," she said in her syrup-coated voice. "Oh, no," Dorothy said, flustered and pulling her robe more tightly around her. She sat back at her dressing table, not looking at me. I thought, though I could have been sure, that the Scarecrow was trying not to laugh. "Tin was telling me he was just explaining that he would stay in the palace to be my protector," Dorothy said. "How charming," Glinda said brightly. all trace of her smirk gone. What a good friend to have. She smiled brightly at me. I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job of keeping Dorothy safe, she said, though I don't think our new princess is in any immediate danger here in the Emerald City. I could have enemies anywhere, Dorothy said, a little peevishly. Everyone is already jealous of me. I'm sure my magic is enough to keep you safe for now, Glinda said. But perhaps the Tin Man would come up with some alternate means of defense. There was that eerie red glitter in the depths of her eyes again, and for the first time since I'd come back to the palace, I actually felt afraid. I had the overwhelming urge to grab Dorothy and run out the door, flee with her back to the Winkies' palace, the Sea of Blossoms, anywhere but here, somewhere she'd be safe. We could be alone, and all of this would be like a bad dream. The red spark flared, and I shook my head. Suddenly, I couldn't remember what I'd been thinking about. I can keep Dorothy safe for now, Glinda was saying. But we need more power, more strength. She was talking to Dorothy, but looking at me, the red spark glowing with the same heartbeat pulse of Dorothy's red shoes. I'll figure something out, I said dully, rising almost as though something of another force had taken control of my limbs and was marching me out the room. Good night, Tin, Dorothy called, and the door to her room shut in my face. I went back to my own rooms and stood for a moment and looking out the window. I had promised to help Dorothy. I'd said I would protect her. But if Glinda wouldn't want me near Dorothy herself, what could I do? It took me a while before I thought of the obvious. A princess needed an army, and an army needed a general. That was what Glinda had been saying trying to get me to see. But where would I find such force? And then it hit me. Of course. I was already a ruler myself. It'd be a simple matter to bring the Winkies to the Emerald City so that they could protect Dorothy while she and Glinda figured out how to return Ozma's stolen magic. Once I decided it was a simple matter of slipping away from the palace, I could tell Glinda or Dorothy of my plans. The army would be my gift to Dorothy. I spent the journey back to the Winkies' kingdom, imagining her reaction when I presented her with her new army, her creamy cheeks flushing with color, her sparkling eyes, her ruby red lips parting breathlessly with joy and awe. Finally, my actions would say what I hadn't been able to tell her in words. And how could she possibly say no to me when she was confronted with the force of my devotion? I knew she felt something for me. Knew it all the way down to my tin joints. It was in the way she looked at me, in the way she'd let me hold her in that room. It was in everything she said to me. She loved me, I was sure of it, but she was too good, too selfless to allow her feelings for me to get in the way of her duty to Oz. But once she and Glinda had restored the stolen magic, we'd be free together. Glinda would find a true successor, and Dorothy and I could go. Why, we could go anywhere. I'd always wanted to visit Polychrome and see the Rainbow Falls. Maybe even a parasol sailing trip across the Sea of Blossoms. I'd heard they were the most romantic spots in all of Oz, and I'd never had anyone to share that with. I was so lost in my reverie, the journey passed in a flash. I didn't even stop to rest or refresh myself when I reached my palace. I strode in my throne room, bellowing for my chancellor, Nobert, who was the most dignified Winkie I could find among my subjects. Over the Winkie's traditional costume of short pants and suspenders, he liked to add a suit jacket and a pince-nez. Unfortunately, it was difficult for someone 3 feet tall and covered with yellow fur to really convey the impression of professionalism, and the decor of the throne room didn't help. The Winkies' palace was comfortable enough, and I wasn't much of a home decorator, so I'd never gotten around to making any changes, other than having furniture large enough for a full-size man made out of my own rooms. The Winkies were enthusiastic artists, if not very good ones, and the walls of the throne room were painted with a lurid series of murals depicting Holonactory scenes of glowing yellow Winkies drifting through a variety of Ozian landscapes. Winkies floating over the poppy fields, Winkies climbing mountain ranges, Winkies sailing in tiny airships over the Sea of Blossoms, Winkies splashing in the Rainbow Falls. For the first time it occurred to me that they were hideously ugly. I'd let the Winkies make all the changes they wanted to the palace after the defeat of the Wicked Witch of the West, but maybe I should have been a little stricter with them. When Dorothy had restored Oz's magic and no longer had to live in the Emerald City as its ruler, I would ask her to come live with me. But to be honest, it was hard to picture her here. Perhaps I should remodel. But those plans could wait. I had more pressing matters to attend to. Tomorrow morning my subjects must assemble in the courtyard, I instructed the Chancellor as he scribbled furiously on his ever-present notepad, pushing his pince-nez up on his nose as it slipped down toward his luxurious golden mustache. I want everyone, from the smallest child to the oldest of the old. I have a tremendously important announcement. He nodded industriously, mouthing the words to himself as he wrote them down. Yes, sir, he said cheerfully. I'll see to it, sir. Will you be wanting your usual oil bath, sir? We've some nice new artisanal scented oils from the country of the Quadlings, and Polychrome sent you a new travel brochure. It's the darndest thing, sir. A singing telegram, if you can believe that. So impressive, what they can do with these magic these days. Why, when I was a lad, we hadn't so much— I don't think you understand, I said coolly. This is not business as usual. The future of Oz is going to change tomorrow. Yes, sir, he repeated absently, chewing the end of his feather quill. I stared at him in disbelief. Why wasn't he taking me seriously? I knew the Winkies were silly creatures, and always had been. I'd never tried to impose such discipline during my rule. There hadn't been any point. But couldn't he hear in my voice how important this was? I was offering my people a chance to make history, and he was babbling on about travel promotions. I felt an unfamiliar emotion seize a hold of me. My heart felt strange in my hollow chest, heavy and hot. I could almost sense it glowing inside me like an ember the color of Dorothy's shoes. The wizard's gift had brought me love, but I realized it also given me a new feeling entirely. Fury. Dorothy trusted me with her life, and I wasn't going to let this stupid Winky keep me from my duty. A red haze descended over my vision, obscuring the room around me, and my hands moved forward of their own volition, grabbing fistfuls of mist. It pooled in my palms like water, pouring between my fingers to fall heavily on the ground, where it slid across the floor in a never-ending spiral wave of red. I watched it move, fascinated. It moved almost like an animal, like something with an intelligence behind it. A strange choking noise interrupted my reveille, and I looked down. To my astonishment, my hands were wrapped around No-Bird's throat, squeezing the life out of him as his eyes bulged desperately. In shock, I opened my fingers, and he collapsed to the floor, wheezing for breath. As quickly as it appeared, the red mist dissipated into long, slender tendrils that slithered into cracks in the stone walls and vanished. I couldn't remember where I was or why my Chancellor was staring at me as though I was about to bite off his head. I looked around, blinking, only recognizing the familiar furniture of my throne room after a long moment. Why was I in my throne room? How had I gotten here? My chest felt strange, as though my heart was moving around inside it. Something was happening to me, something I couldn't explain. Everything will be as you wish in the morning, Your Majesty, my Chancellor whispered, his voice shaking. What had I wished for in the morning? I thought about this for a while, and then I remembered I had wanted to address my subjects. What was it? An army. I was building Dorothy's army, as a gift for her. Relieved, I nodded, still not entirely sure why my Chancellor was lying at my feet. Perhaps he'd slipped? I don't remember that either. I needed a good bath to clear my mind. Excellent work, I said. Left him on the heap of the floor as I went to my rooms. I summoned a few of the house Winkies with the bell I kept in my room for such purposes, and they obligingly drew me a bath of warm oil. Was it just my imagination, or did they keep looking at me? Why was everyone acting so strangely? The oil was perfumed, I noticed. Hadn't No-Bird been saying something about a new shipment? And a rich, pleasant scent filled my bathroom. Tin man that I am, I don't have much need of ordinary human fixtures. I don't even really need sleep anymore, though I do my best to follow the rhythms of a normal human. But I do enjoy a good oil bath. I sank into the warm, sweet-smelling oil, dismissing the Winkies with a wave of my hand. They practically ran out of the room. Something was definitely up, but I had no idea what it could be. As the oil cooled, I turned my thoughts to the next morning. I'd make a short speech to the Winkies, explaining the situation. They were too foolish to really understand the complexities of politics, but as long as I explained things simply, they should be able to follow. I had no doubt they would be eager as I was to defend Dorothy. It was true, I suppose, that they wouldn't make the most intimidating army. They were awfully short, and the suspenders sometimes made them look a little silly. But they were only the beginning, and I knew Dorothy would be delighted with my initiative. I'd march them to the Emerald City and assemble them for her so she could see all the work I'd really done for her on her behalf. And when I would find more recruits, anyone in Oz I knew would be so happy to help out on behalf of their savior, the girl who killed the wicked witches. I wondered idly how the next ruler of Oz would be chosen, once Glinda and Dorothy had restored the stolen magic. It was too bad about Ozma. I'd always sort of liked her, but there was no telling what kinds of wicked secrets even good people are hiding.